We are enormously proud and excited to present Divine Egypt here at the Met. This exhibition builds on over a century of deep engagement of the Metropolitan Museum of Art with ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt had an enormously broad and complex pantheon of deities. This exhibition really focuses on the idea of understanding the symbolism of the gods of Egypt and how they related to the Egyptians' way of life. About half of the objects that you will see in this show will come from the Met, but because also of the Met's standing within the world of Egyptian scholarship, our major partners were willing to lend their masterpieces, maybe in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And now I'm delighted to welcome you into the world of Divine Egypt.
Absolutes were not part of the Egyptian worldview. It didn't bother them at all that there were multiple mythologies of the creation, that there were multiple deities who could either do the same thing or do different things. It was all part of the way the world worked. We want people to try and step back from our Western view of categorization and try and understand how the ancient Egyptians approached their religious practice. Divine Egypt is the opportunity to explore the elements that the ancient Egyptians chose in order to represent each of their deities, to explore why certain pieces of iconography went with each deity. I'm Diana Craig Patch. I'm the Lila Acheson Wallace Curator in charge of the Department of Egyptian Art at the Metropolitan Museum. Brendan Hainline was the research associate on the project. Brendan has been a great support, and he ended up the co-curator on the catalog. It's been wonderful to work with him. The divine landscape, which is the group of gods that the Egyptians depended on to keep their world working on a daily basis, developed from about 4000 BC and continued all the way through to the Roman period, somewhere after 100 AD. By the end of Egyptian history, you're looking at some 1,500 deities. And it's important to understand that these images actually were believed to house the spirit of the deity that is represented by that statue.
So the exhibition begins with expressing the divine.
The purpose of this gallery is an introduction to the ways that gods can be presented.
And for this section, we picked two deities that really exemplify the divine, Hathor and Horus. We picked Hathor because she is this very preeminent female goddess, but she also has a lot of roles, and those roles are reflected in her many forms. Whereas Horus really has one primary role as the god of kingship.
Hathor has all of these different ways of being represented, but Horus is always a falcon or a falcon-headed man with a double crown.
And these two deities also provide a great sort of introduction to the types of iconography we see on gods.
And head ornaments in particular are important. Sometimes the dress that they use, sometimes the various scepters that they're carrying or staves. All of these contribute, and if their name is there, it's really helpful.
This is a triad from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, that shows the goddess Hathor seated, flanked by King Menkaure of the 4th dynasty, and a deification of a provincial unit called gnomes in Egyptology. These pieces represent the earliest known sculptural representations of the goddess Hathor. And we can see that she already has her well-known head ornament of these cattle horns and sun disk from this very early period.
And this is a pair statue of the god Horus and the king Horemheb. Horemheb was the last king of the 18th dynasty, so he followed basically Tutankhamun. It is a piece from the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna.
I think this pair statue really sort of represents him trying to assert his legitimacy by pairing himself with Horus, the god of kingship.
And I like the way he's positioned Horus to put his arm around the king, indicating that Horus is bringing Horemheb into the divine sphere. Re, the sun god, is the center of everything. He is what makes the world work, but he's not alone. And this whole section actually shows you a group of deities that work with Re to carry out various tasks, and they are called the body of gods. Re is the source of light and warmth, and without him, the world couldn't work. But Re is very interesting to me because he is not a single representation. It depends on the time of day that is being represented as to how he is depicted, and that is fascinating. So this, in the morning, is a giant scarab.
Yes, this is a form called Khepri, and the Egyptians envisioned Khepri as the scarab beetle who pushes the sun across the sky.
And this was a generous loan from the British Museum in London. But the scarab isn't the only way that the sun moves into the sky. And this shows you that the Egyptians had a variety of ways of understanding the world, but it all worked for them.
So in addition to Khepri, Re can be shown in a number of other different forms. Re Harakti is a very important one, where he is typically depicted as a falcon-headed man with a sun disk on his head, often encircled by a uraeus. But Re can also be shown as a solar child emerging from a lotus.
They didn't need one or the other. You didn't have a single one. Multiple explanations were fine.
And they're all very compelling images. Ma is such an interesting goddess. She is, in a way, core to much of the ideology that underpins Egyptian religion.
This is a wonderful relief from a royal tomb that was just recently conserved for this exhibition by the Museo Archeologico Nazionale in Florence. And we are so lucky to have been able to get this. And it depicts the goddess Maat.
She is both a goddess and also represents this all-important concept of Ma'at, of rightness, correctness, truth.
It's sort of like keeping the world the way it should be.
The verb ma'a originally means like to guide, to be correct. And because she represents this almost abstract concept, Ma'at, she can be depicted as a woman with an ostrich feather on her head.
And I also want to add that the ostrich feather stands for her. It stands for the concept. And so you keep looking for that feather because you'll find it all through the exhibition.
The third section in the show is called Creating the World, and that is where we focus on the many different creation accounts in Egyptian mythology and the gods included in those accounts. And we started in this room with the Ennead. An Ennead is a Greek word for a group of 9. And you can see in this helpful family tree that these 4 generations of deities representing the Heliopolitan myth of creation do come out to 9.
I just want to draw your attention to the depiction of Nut.
Yes, the goddess of the sky.
And I mentioned her earlier because she is an alternative explanation for how the sun comes into the sky in the morning. She gives birth to the sun, and you can see it on this wonderful illustration of Nut.
Not only does she give birth to the sun in the morning, she also swallows him every night.
That's right. So it passes through her body, and that's part of the mythology, but very different from the scarab story. What is interesting is we can look at another representation of the part of the Ennead, which we can see on the coffin of Nani from our collection, one of the amazing 21st dynasty coffins that the Met excavated back in the 20s.
And here we see Nut as the sky goddess arcing over the scene in a very common way in which she was represented. Underneath, there is the earth god Geb, and then between them is the air god Shu. Despite their importance as a group of 9, they are almost never represented together as a group of 9. This representation with only 3 of the Ennead is sort of the most common representation of the group.
And even that isn't that common.
No.
It's hard to find it, and it's hard to find objects that depict any one of this group of 9. But the Ennead is not the only way that things are created in ancient Egypt. There are multiple ways, which is what I found very interesting, and they overlap.
We have Khnum, the ram-headed deity who creates people on his potter's wheel. We have Ptah, who created the world, including all the gods, out of speech and thought. And then there are deities that are involved in fertility and creation in general, one of which being Min, who was very associated with male fertility. It was excavated by the Ashmolean, who was very generous in lending it to us. 5,000 years old, one of the earliest monumental sculptures from ancient Egypt. And you can see elements of Min's iconography, but still in a very archaic form.
So now we've moved into the fourth section, which is called Coping with Life. And it is very different from the first three sections, which deal with the gods that the king is responsible for worshiping. People aren't allowed in the temples. So how do people relate to these deities? There's a variety of ways. But the most interesting way that I thought that you could communicate to these gods from the temple is when the god's statue comes out in festival. And then he or she seems to have been carried through the streets, and you could relate to that deity, you could talk to that deity as it moved.
Although the cult image was still hidden within a shrine, it was placed on this processional boat, this bark, that was then carried through the streets.
And so we have attempted to recreate such a sacred bark. How do you solve your problems of poor health, or your worry about having a child, or your wife's pregnancy, or even love, power, jealousy? These things are all recorded in various places. You needed to talk to your God, and this was a way you could do it.
And the barks provided an opportunity for that.
Yeah, it provided a way of feeling like you were connected to deities that you had little access to any other way. And we do have a video made by Sharif El-Katasha of a celebration in Luxor of a sacred Sufi saint that incorporates in the festival the use of boats.
It really shows how these elements may have trickled down over the years and been integrated into modern practices. And the centerpiece of our reconstructed bark is this wonderful statuette of Amun that we have in the Met's own collection. Solid gold was almost certainly one of these special cult objects brought forth on these processional barks, and it is incredibly rare. A very fitting end to the exhibition is overcoming death, which was something that everyone within Egyptian society, king and non-royal alike, had to deal with. And they dealt with it in seemingly very similar ways, appealing to the same core group of gods. You have Anubis, the god of embalming, the mourning sisters, Isis and Nephthys, and of course, Osiris. And the myth of Osiris underlies why he is so important to mortuary practices. He was once the king of Egypt, but was slain by his brother Seth and chopped up into many pieces. His sisters, Isis and Nephthys, put him back together, assembled him into the first mummy, the prototypical mummy, which is why he is represented in this shrouded form, and then also the ruler of the afterlife.
This is one of my favorite pieces. I just love the serenity of his face. It is a Metropolitan Museum of Art piece, and it's just wonderful. It's a copper alloy, but he's so peaceful looking and calm, and he's looking out into the distance. Osiris is one of the major deities in the divine landscape, and he is very recognizable.
And this piece is so great because the iconography is so rich. He holds the crook and the flail, symbols of kingship. He wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, embellished with these ostrich feathers and spiral ram horns, and of course, the royal uraeus. It really exemplified what we wanted to communicate in this show, how you can use iconography to identify a deity.
So I chose to conclude the exhibition with this spectacular pendant from the Musée du Louvre that shows the triad of Osiris, Horus, and Isis, the prototypical Egyptian family. It is made in gold, which is the skin of the gods, and lapis, which is the hair of the gods. And it was commissioned by a king from around 800 BCE. Most recent research suggested it was made to be hung around the neck of a divine statue in a temple. And it's inscribed with the gifts that these three are going to give the king: a sorkan. Osiris will give him long life. Isis will rejuvenate him many times. And Horus will give him strength and victory. And I just love all this information is communicated in this one piece. which is beautifully made, but not as big as everybody thinks it is.
But still, so much detail and so much iconography. Each deity is completely recognizable. We have an inscription that names them, which is nice, but
you would
we
know.
didn't even need it.
No, you would know who it is. And his wife and his son gently reach out to touch him, to protect him. It's just a very touching family setting. I hope people come away with an understanding that these images are actually the way the ancient Egyptians related to life, death, and meaning. These were active images that housed the gods, that helped them with their daily problems.
Over the course of researching divine iconography, we found a lot of new things, a lot of old ideas were changed, and we were really trying to look at the gods from the way the ancient Egyptians did, and really trying to get away from more Western, more classical ways of interpreting these objects that has been the historical way in the last century of Egyptology.